Hello, hello, everybody. Lovely people of both LinkedIn and YouTube. Quick reminder, if you want to watch some of the old replays and you don't want to scroll through my newsfeed, then head over to YouTube, type in my name. All the past interviews are there as well. While you're there, share, like, subscribe, all the drill. Welcome back to another Monday LinkedIn live interview. And today, I know this one will be great because we have Paul here. Paul, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your surname. It's probably similar to how people don't want to pronounce mine because it's quite unusual. But welcome to the show. It's a huge pleasure to have you here. And shout out to our friend Dan who introduced us. Could you please do a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into it.
Yeah, Micha, absolutely. It's great to be here on the show. Paul Rulkens, the name is Rulkens, and my expertise is high performance. So what it means is I help people, teams, and organizations to achieve big goals with the least amount of effort. And if you think about it, I do it in three ways. First of all, I'm a professional speaker, so I create awareness, I give tools. The second thing, I'm an author, I write books. And the third thing, I'm also a trusted boardroom advisor, where I help organizations, leadership teams to implement the ideas to help their organization get everything they can out of all they've got. So that's a little bit my bio, where I come from and what I do, Michael.
Perfect. Well, I see there's a lot of books behind you as well. So you're also an avid reader and writer.
Absolutely.
Paul, well, the title of today's conversation is Leaving the Field Behind, and then how the best get better. Now, how the best get better seems more familiar, but what do you mean when you say leave the field behind? Let's start there, because there must be a message behind it.
Yeah, well, what I mean with leaving the field behind is if you talk about success, if you talk about high performance, what you see is that there's a small group which is leaving the field behind. With head and shoulders, they are like a tall giraffe surrounded by tiny field mice. And the reason why I like this concept so much is that I've always been fascinated by what is it that these people, teams, and organizations do differently. In other words, what is the method to the madness if you really want to leave the field behind? And the funny thing is, if you study that type of material, what you see is that success is predictable. It's not guaranteed, but it's predictable. Because what you see is that these organizations, which stand apart from anyone else, are doing things differently, and they're doing things differently consistently. So my objective has always been to study the consistent approach to high performance, the consistent approach to leaving the field behind. So that's the reason why I love this title so much.
Well, it always is about the little consistent actions that you do on a daily basis versus big things every now and then. So, Paul, let's focus a little bit more on the work that you do when you are advisor. So you work with corporations, you work with leadership teams, senior leadership teams, I'm guessing. Now, let's start maybe like with what are the most common things that you see as struggles, challenges at your entry into the company, and how do you then help them with overcoming those obstacles or those challenges?
Yeah, typically if I look at my clients, I got two types of clients. The first one is, I would call those the corporate clients, usually global organizations, big organizations. And when I work with those organizations, their focus is usually about building high performance organizations. And that has several elements there. It's about leadership, it's about strategy execution, but also about innovation. So that's one part of my work. The second part of my work is I work with small and medium enterprises, usually the business owners, the teams which run the business itself. And typically If you translate high performance into the small medium enterprise, it's about achieving their strategic goals, especially growth. And that is what I often found with my clients in the small and medium enterprises. Growth is a very important part. What is it we can do to accelerate growth further? So those are two areas where I focus on. Now, what I see with both clients that I have is typically when I work with a boardroom, work with the managers. What I always look at is behaviors, and that is a big secret of high performance. My focus is which type of behaviors are needed to take the next step in an organization. It's usually not about the systems or the processes, but it's about the behaviors. And the reason is actually very simple. You will never get the new results that you want from the existing behaviors that you like. And once people understand that, all of a sudden they also understand the method to the madness, how to improve performance.
Well, I agree fully with you. System and processes and stuff. That's basically the foundation that needs to be in place anyway. I mean, if you don't have that, well, then you're definitely not ready for growth, because without a system, it's very hard to grow, especially at a high level. But when it comes to behavior, I find it very interesting that you said that. I'm often saying to my clients, reward behavior, not the outcome. When you see proper behavior in somebody, reward that, because then you inspire others to do that behavior. And, with a little bit of polishing, we will find a way to get to the goal, as long as somebody's, I don't know, picking the phone or doing this or doing that. So I like how you were saying that. Well, Paul, when it comes to big corporations, that seems interesting. So in big corporations, you have multitude of teams.
Absolutely.
And not all of them are as high performing. So how does that play inside that ecosystem? When I work with entrepreneurs mostly, and we always try to look holistically at the organization, and trying to see where we have bottlenecks and what we need to improve to align the whole corporation. But in big corporations with multitude of teams, how does that play out? How do you see that?
Well, if you're dealing with multiple teams, a couple of things which are important. First of all, there's an overall strategy, a corporate strategy, and the question is, of course, what is it that we need to do to align to this corporate strategy? So that's a basic question: alignment of the goals to the strategy itself. Then the second step is the individual teams. If you talk about the different business groups or business units, they all have different teams in order to make that happen. Now, typically, what I do is I work with one team. And as soon as I start working with one team, bring them to the higher level. It's about making successful people more successful. What you see is that they start to influence the other parts of the organization as well, because they start to role model the behaviors that are needed to take the next step. And this is a slow ripple in a pond. All of a sudden, you'll get an avalanche where the entire organization looks at these type of teams, these high performance teams, and want to emulate the behaviors they see over there. And this is how you move real change also in big corporations. So my approach has never been to look at the entire organization and roll out big programs to do that. That's usually not what happens. What I usually do, I start with senior leadership. I talk about role modeling the behaviors necessary in order to take the next step. And through role modeling, in the end, you'll influence the entire organization. So this is how big corporations in the end operate.
Yeah, I mean, because you can't make big program run in a corporation all at once. It needs to come together slowly.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, are there any maybe real life examples that you could share from some of your past clients? You don't have to name any client, but just maybe give us an example how things were before you joined. What was the journey that you guys did together, and what was the outcome?
Well, I give you an example in the corporate world, and one of the interesting things is if you talk about behaviors, it's not so much about building new behaviors, but it's about getting rid of unhelpful behaviors, on behaviors which mask your strength. And this is interesting because typically organizations move towards high performance when individuals understand these are the behaviors I show which mask my strength. And I give you an example. I was working with a management team, and they were high performance. They made the numbers. They were very good at what they were doing. But the thing is, they were not operating as a team. They were individuals operating, improving their silos. So when we were diving into the behaviors, what are the behaviors there? Of course, they were very competitive in order to make that happen. But one of the things, and that was a uniform behavior in the entire team, was a behavior which was interesting. It was unhelpful behavior, masking their strength. It was adding too much value. Adding too much value. Now, what does it mean? It means that when the senior executives came together, they all want to have airtime. So in the end, you had senior meetings where people were giving the summary of the summary of the summary in order to say something in the meeting themselves. Now, that was interesting because once you hold the mirror, this is what I see doing. This is the model, the behavior you show in the organization. This group realized that this was not helpful behavior. So we shifted their thinking from adding too much value to listening to understand, and much more inclusive behavior. And what happened, the next step in the entire organization is that people understood the next step is no longer to create airtime, but the next step is to create value. And that was a very important mindset shift in the behavior. And in the end, what you saw is that strategy execution was much easier in an organization like that by this simple approach of getting rid of unhelpful behavior.
Yeah, and they probably regained a lot of the time by doing things in that way and not over communicating every single thing 17 times. So I guess the number of meetings were lower, meetings were faster, and just by that, people had more time to actually do things than sit in the meetings, and the whole organization grew from that. Am I understanding it correctly?
Absolutely. There's a time aspect, which is wasting time. The other aspect, of course, is if you start to add too much value, if you always want to intrude as a leader, also to your employees, building on their ideas, at a certain point in time, you lose commitment. Imagine you are an employee, you walk into your boss's office, you've got a brilliant idea, and the boss thinks, well, that's a great idea, but I am the boss, I need to add some value, so you add some trivial thing, which is irrelevant for the idea. What happens is that you have added too much value, but you've lost the commitment of the people. And if you lose commitment, you also lose strategy execution power. So it's about time, but especially about commitment. People need commitment in order to make it happen. And so it's a very subtle way of behavior.
Yeah. I mean, you want the buy-in, but then if you keep adding on top of that, and especially if it's something that's not vital, people will feel downgraded instead of elevated, and then you lose the buy-in from their end.
Absolutely, and again, these behaviors might not always be obvious. I'll give you an example. I was working with an executive, and she was complaining that everyone came late to her meeting. So I was sitting in the meeting, and something interesting happened. First of all, everyone came late, but then the second thing is that the first one who came in the meeting itself, who was the person who was more or less in time, the first one would be assigned to be the scribe, making notes of the meeting. Yeah. So what you got is that people subconsciously did not want to be the first one in this meeting itself. So by simply the behavior change, understanding what was going on, so no longer putting the first people in the meeting on the spot being the scribe, this change of behavior helped enormously to improve the meeting itself. So it's usually a subtle set of behaviors which do not give the right outcomes in an organization.
How much of what you're explaining right now is connected with ego? I need to add something just because I'm the boss, and like, is there a lot of ego involved with the teams that you work with, leaders that you work with?
Well, I would say there's a lot of ego involved. I would also say it's a lot of healthy ego because these are very successful people. The thing, however, is what has got them here will no longer get them there. So if they want to have different results to need to do different things, raising the bar itself. And that is not always easy, because a lot of ego is being invested in the job you have, the accomplishments you've had so far. And who are you to tell me I need to do it differently? So the ego is being involved. Now, the thing is that usually there's also very successful, very smart people. So when you point out that it's more important to be successful than to be right, then all of a sudden they start to understand this and they start to change their own behaviors. So this is the way you can touch and build on the ego itself. Very successful people.
Well, Paul, one of the reasons that I decided to focus more on entrepreneurs is because change happens much slower in the bigger the organization is. And then, you pair that with old industry versus new industries and stuff like that. And things can slow down even more. So you have a lot of experience working with corporations. How open are leaders, and maybe not the top leaders, maybe not the C-level, but, middle management, to change, or like when you come in, are they open to that? Or is your first job to help them even figure out that help is needed, that behavior needs to change, that what gets you here will not move you forward? So does it start with education and getting the buy-in from them? Or are at least the companies that hire you already open to that? And, in every team, the bigger the team, the more people you have in there. So some might be more open, some less open. Like, what is your experience in that area?
Well, the first observation I need to make, if you talk about change, is there's a myth out there, and the myth is that change is hard. Now, if you think about it, change is not hard. Imagine you're driving a car and your navigation tells you go right because there's a queue ahead. You trust navigation, you go right, so you change in the moment. So change itself is not hard. What is hard is the road to change. So the moment you're ready to change and creating that moment, that is the hard thing. So that's the first observation in any organization. The second thing is, when I typically start with organizations, they are doing very well, but they see there's something missing. Usually the execution power is not great. So at a certain point, at a certain level, there's awareness, wait a second, we need to do something. Yeah. And the first conversation always, they need to do something, but at a certain point in time, there's also a realization, I need to do something. And that's also in the senior leadership. So that's the second observation there. And the third observation is, if you truly want to do change, there are only three reasons why people change. The first is compliance. If you don't do it, you get fired. The second is peer pressure. Your neighbor is doing it, so perhaps you should do it too. And the third one is enlightened self-interest. And the enlightened self-interest is based on the question, hey, what's in it for me? Now, the thing is, if you take out the pressure, if you take out the rules, then number 1 and 2, compliance and peer pressure. When you drive change to compliance and peer pressure, people return to the old behaviors. It's only enlightened self-interest that will truly help change anchor in the organization itself. So what's always important in these kind of approaches and approaches I have is to connect it to the enlightened self-interest. So in other words, if we are able to achieve this, to do this different thing, how will it help you to achieve your goals? And that's the most important question, which you need to answer in change.
Okay, so you've laid it down like really nicely. What happens for change to happen? Now, if we switch gears and go from corporations where you have peer pressure and stuff like that, bigger team, you always have a boss above you. Even if you're the CEO, then you have board of directors and shareholders and so on. Now, if we switch gears and we go to smaller entrepreneurs who maybe have just a few people around them, and even those people, they're just employees, they will not hold you accountable. You are shareholder and the C-level, and also most of the time you do certain things in the business. That road to change that you mentioned. Are there any examples, or is there any framework we can follow because I know many entrepreneurs, and they are often very aware of the things that they're doing maybe wrong, or that they could improve on, behaviors that would best support them on the journey.
Yeah.
The lack of awareness is often not the problem, but they still don't do it. So that change, and I can almost see often, if they would just be an employee, they would perform much better because of, I don't know, now that they're their own boss, they somehow look through the fingers when it comes to themselves. So can we dive into that a little bit and
Yeah,
switch gears?
absolutely. This is what I see with entrepreneurs. They're facing two things. First of all, they need to make it up, and the second thing is they need to make it happen. And two things they need to do, and they need to do this equally well. Otherwise, they will fail. Now, typically, when I work with entrepreneurs, I look at three areas. First of all, I look at clarity. How clear are they about their goals? And clarity is a very important one. Because it has two sides. It is what you want, but especially what you do not want. So one of the things I always advise entrepreneurs to do, and one of the exercises I always do, is to make a never to do list. And so these are the things I never do in order to make money in my business. And this is very helpful because it helps you to make decisions upfront, very clear. And so it's great, helpful to get clarity. The second part of an entrepreneur is focus. And focus is very important. There are a million ways to achieve your goals if you have identified the goals, but few of them will give you the energy and have a low risk profile. That's what I call focus. And one of the most important parts of focus is strategic quitting. And strategic quitting is about your ability to quit. You have to quit activities in order to release the time and the money and the energy to do new activities. So one of the most important behaviors that entrepreneurs can do is entrepreneurial hygiene, which is strategic quitting all the time. And quitting stuff that's no longer serving the goals, serving the needs. Especially the stuff which doesn't create value in the eyes of the customer. So that's the second part of focus. And the third part, where I help entrepreneurs, is execution. Create a system or a process to execute on a daily basis. If you got a focus, if you got clarity what you want to achieve, what is it that you do yourself and your team to execute on a daily basis? Execute on a daily basis. And for example, one of the habits I teach entrepreneurs, it's a very good habit. I also teach it to executives, also for them it's a very good habit, is to eat your frog. Eat your frog. And eat your frog, it's imagine every morning you wake up, you eat a living frog, probably the worst thing you do the entire day. Now, eat your frog is fortunately a metaphor to start your day with the thing that you fear most. Because if you start your day with the thing that you fear most, two things happen. First of all, the rest of the day is fun and easy. Nothing can bring you down. You will be highly productive. But the second thing is it's often the thing that you fear most that will help you to make the next step achieving your goals. And that's your frog. So building this habit, eating your frog, yourself and your organization will have a huge impact on your execution power as an entrepreneur.
Nicely said. Really nicely said. Thank you for that, Paul. But Paul, now let's go in between either entrepreneurs or team leaders. When you work with them and you help them create highly effective teams, whether that's in a business or in a corporation, what are some of the soft skills that you help leaders and entrepreneurs with so that they can motivate the team, that they can inspire change, empower people, and so on, so that the whole team becomes a high-performing team?
Yeah. This is the essence of a high-performance team. The high-performance team, each team member is building on his or her strength. And that is also key. If you want to take the next step, it's about building on your strength. It's much easier to become 10 times stronger in the stuff you are already good at than try to improve 10% at the stuff you are very lousy at. Yeah? And high performers know that. They know that if they would focus their entire life on trying to compensate weaknesses, they will only end up with a strong set of strong weaknesses. So this is not a recipe for high performance. Now, if you translate that into soft skills, what it means, one of the important soft skills is to understand your own strength, but also delegate work to others in your team so they can build on their strength. And this is what we call delegation, which is something which is work for you. Give it to someone else for whom it is play, someone in your team who it is play. They like to do it. And I'll give you an example. When I was a corporate executive, I was part of a team, and we had SAP as an ERP program, and I was confused about SAP. I had no connection with SAP. I had to beg for a password every time I had to do something in there. Got nothing to do with the program, beautiful program, but everything to do with me. Now, in my team, there was someone who loved to do SAP. So I did delegation there. She would do all my SAP work. And in exchange, I would build cool Excel spreadsheets for her. And this is typically an example of soft skills. And I come back to what you said earlier about ego. To put your ego away. It's not about being good at everything. It's being good at the stuff you are already good at, and the rest delegate to everyone else. So that's typically a soft skill I teach high performance teams. What is it you can do differently to build on each other's strength? And this is how you create high performance.
Very good one. Yeah, it like as you were explaining, it really made me think, and yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Well, Paul, we are nearing the 30-minute mark, and oh boy, there's like just so many things I could still ask you. But the first thing is, so you write books, you speak at conferences, you do advisory consulting work. Who should reach out to you, and what is the best way to reach out to you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it go to your website? Like, what's the best way?
The first question is the who. Everyone fascinated by the subject of high performance, either on their way, or maybe they are already at high performance. How to raise the bar even further in a corporate, in an entrepreneurial setting. People in love with raising the bar, raising the bar for themselves, for their teams, for their organization, making successful people all more successful. So the way to reach out to me, a couple of ways of doing it. First of all, if you go to my website, www.paulrulkens.com, you will find a ton of information, a ton of ideas. You will find blog posts, you will find white papers, you will find videos where I explain some of the concepts that we have discussed here. The second thing, connect with me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource. We can connect our networks, but also I publish on a regular basis on LinkedIn my ideas, new ideas to raise the bar. The third thing is you can subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. And in my weekly newsletter, every week, I discuss subjects. I give you practical tools, practical ideas, how to raise the bar. It gives you an almost unfair advantage. And finally, of course, you can read my books. And you can find them on Amazon. And in my books, I go into the depth, I go into the detail, I describe the method to the madness in order to make that happen. So various way of doing it, my website, my newsletter, my books, but also connect with me on LinkedIn, Paul Rulkens.
Perfect. Paul, I went a little bit left and right. We went to corporations and teams and entrepreneurs, and we only have the 30-ish minutes. So it's hard to ask all the questions. And so my last question before we say goodbye is always, maybe I forgot to ask something. So is there the last golden nugget of wisdom that, you really want to leave the audience with before we say goodbye?
Micha, absolutely. Here's one golden nugget which I want to give to the audience. Here's the big secret about high performance. The big secret about high performance is to understand your obstacles and then build a system or process to overcome your obstacles. Now, the fastest way of doing that is we call this a pre-mortem exercise. And this is a great exercise that you can do as a corporate executive, as an entrepreneur. What you do with a pre-mortem, it's the opposite of a post-mortem. In a post-mortem, you look at failed projects and you say, why did we fail? Pre-mortem, you do the following. You imagine 3 years from now, your enterprise, your organization failed so miserably that the Wall Street Journal has dispatched a couple of journalists to talk to you what happened. Now, with a little group, you discuss this little exercise, and then you list all the reasons why you failed. We didn't have clients, we didn't focus on behaviors, we didn't have the money, we run out of cash flow, etc., etc., etc. And once you got this list, here's the beauty of this exercise, then decide on a system of process for each of the elements you mentioned so that it never happens. The system of process which will overcome this failure. The system of process, for example, that you run out of cash. So what would the system of process look like? Once you got this, all the ideas to design a system of process to overcome failure, then you got your strategic plan. And this is how you can execute. This is the most powerful way of doing strategy, in a fast way of doing it. And it ties in actually to the simple idea. The key to success is not to fail in such a way there's no recovery. Failing is fine as long as you learn and as long as you recover. But if you don't recover, you have reached an event horizon, and it's no longer possible to come back from that one. So the pre-mortem, very powerful exercise. It's about thinking of failure and designing a system or process to overcome the failure. That is the trick of high performance.
As the fail coach and somebody obsessed with failure, I absolutely love this analogy, pre-mortem. I always used let's plan for failure, let's figure out. But yeah, I love the pre-mortem. So let's look 3 years in advance. And you made such a huge fuck up that Wall Street Journal had to send 5 journalists to interview you. I mean, yeah, that is an amazing exercise, really. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I will credit you whenever I use this terminology, but I absolutely love it, Paul. I absolutely do. Well, Paul, it was a huge pleasure, and it was very enjoyable from my end to have you as a guest. Thank you so much for being on my show, for sharing all this value. And I just wish you everything the best going forward. Lots of success with the books and speaking gigs now that things will probably reopen soon. Thank you so much for this. It was really, really enjoyable.
Mira, it was a pleasure being there. So thanks for being on the show. I enjoyed being here.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everybody. So, this was a really, really nice closing to an amazing interview. I just absolutely love how Paul said this pre-mortem thing. And yes, it's so important to do this exercise. So if you haven't yet, do this in your business. It will change not just what is happening and how prepared going forward, but it will also change your outlook on things. So this was a really, really good one. How did I not come up with that? So, high performance, we are all listening about hustle, grind. If you're in corporation, KPIs, this, that, deadlines, goals, companies are recovering from what happened last year, and there is more pressure on everybody for the high performance. So, a really important topic. I'm really glad that Paul was my guest today. And yes, please make sure to check him out, connect with him on LinkedIn. He's an amazing person to talk to, and see how he can help you with your high performance. But yeah, that's it for today. I hope everybody's healthy and safe wherever you are. There's still a lot of craziness happening around the world. But we'll get through that as well. And next Monday, another interview. It will be great. It will be fun. So see you then. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can watch the replays. Take care, guys. See you next Monday.